could return home to strike in a terrorist attack. In fact, Attorney General Eric Holder was speaking in Norway last week, and he said, if we wait for our nation's citizens to travel to Syria or Iraq to become radicalized and to return home, it may be too late to adequately protect our national security. What's interesting about that statement is that it already is too late based upon what he said, because our citizens are traveling, in fact, to Syria and Iraq. We know this to be the case, and they're being used in propaganda. They're being used in videos that are being distributed to try to get other foreign fighters to show up, most notably Andrew Poulain. Now, he is a French Canadian, or from Canada, and he's part of a well-produced and pretty slick social media campaign now to try to get jihadists to show up in Iraq. Here's him explaining why he decided to get his jihad on in Iraq. Listen.
Before Islam, I was like any other regular Canadian. I watched hockey, I went to the cottage in the summertime, I loved to fish, I wanted to go hunting, I liked outdoors, I liked sports. So it's not like I was some social outcast, it wasn't like I was some anarchist or somebody who just wants to destroy the world and kill everybody. No, I was a regular person. And you know, mujahideen are regular people too.
Later on in the video, by the way, he was killed fighting in Syria, actually, trying to take a battlefield. I just did a quick scan before we came on today, and there was also a Scottish foreign fighter who has been killed in the past 24 hours. He showed up to join ISIS, somebody that people didn't expect this to happen. Well, what is the threat level here for the U.S., and what can we do about this? Joining us is Tim Clementi. He's a former FBI counterterror investigator and special agent and friend of ours here at the table. Tim, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
Tim, one thing is that I think was interesting about this Poulain video is that he makes it very clear that this is an all-hands-on-deck effort for the jihadists. They're not just looking for fighters. They're looking for anybody who can contribute to the jihad in any way. I just want to play that clip, and then we're going to ask you a question about it. Play the clip.
This means more than just fighting. We need the engineers, we need doctors, we need professionals, we need volunteers, we need fundraising, we need everything. You know, there's a role for everybody. Every person can contribute something to the Islamic State.
Tim, it seems like they're trying to get people to almost to immigrate to the Islamic State. They're getting people to try to show up to become a part of this jihadist society. That seems to be unusual for what we've seen recently in the Middle East, but it's also a harbinger of things to come, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, Buck. And it's not really that unusual to be recruiting like this. I mean, if we look back at Al-Qaeda and other groups around the world, Islamic extremist groups. I mean, Al-Qaeda had Adam Gaddan, who was raised as a Christian homeschooled kid in Oregon and California and became a mouthpiece for Osama bin Laden. You have Anwar al-Awlaki, who grew up in New Mexico and then lived here in Northern Virginia at a mosque not far from where I live. And others, Hamami and out of Al-Shabaab in Somalia, who grew up in the United States, in Alabama of all places. So they're not doing this because they want to be equal opportunity employers. They're doing this because this is a force multiplier, getting the Western world involved in the jihad. Typically, it's been a problem in the Arab world, in the Middle East, in poorer third world countries. But when you start bringing in Westerners, especially a normal Canadian kid like this Poulain kid, I mean, most of them end up taking long dirt naps in the end, but it's still a recruiting tool because then they're martyrs like this guy. And what they're doing is the force multiplication isn't just the fighters. And that's what makes this really dangerous, because you get somebody that knows how to use Twitter, Facebook, other kinds of social media to recruit and to find people that maybe I don't want to die in the battlefield, but hey, I believe in the cause, so I'll help them do this or that. And those things are all very supportive of the cause, and they make it very dangerous, because if they can recruit these people that are here, that don't necessarily have to go. I mean, the Attorney General said they get radicalized when they go over there, and that's nonsense. They go over there because they're radicalized. That's the problem, is that they're being radicalized internally, domestically, in their home states and countries, and that's where they are a real threat.
It's Charles Cook. I have a question. You just talked effectively about the supply of these, or rather the demand for these people, but not about the supply. I mean, obviously not everyone who is a Muslim is a terrorist. We know that is very clearly not the case. But this philosophy does have, it seems, an odd purchase over the minds of people who you would not think would fall for it. Why is that? I mean, is that because it's sort of the main rebellious counter movement in the world at the moment, or is there something inherent in Islamism that just attracts people like Poulain and all of the various Americans and other westernized people you mentioned? What is it?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that they use is guilt, because once you can convert somebody to Islam, this kid Poulan, you know, was searching. He says I wasn't like an anarchist, but from what I understand about his background, is he was searching. He looked at, you know, anarchist agent, you know, as being an agent of anarchism, but that didn't work for him. He looked into Christianity and other things, and he was searching. And so when you're searching, you're vulnerable. And so the way the Islamists do it is they bring in, you know, if we look at the 19/9/11 hijackers, they bring in kids that they're intelligent, the engineers, and they're working on other educational fields that take a good deal of intelligence, and they guilt them. And they guilt them by saying, look, the rest of the Islamic world is suffering, and look how you're living. Look at the school you're going to. Look at what you're studying. You're ignoring Allah, and you're ignoring Allah's teaching, and you're going off into these Western ways. And those Western ways are not God's ways. And so when you have somebody that's searching, and they're vulnerable looking for answers, and somebody provides what appear to be reasonable answers, and then pushes you past that reasonableness into the extremism, and it happens every day. It happens all over the world, and it's in this age group of young males primarily, and some females, who are in the searching age. They're looking for meaning in their life. And
Tara, you know, there's an important part of this that we have to close. We're talking about the going over there, and I think people at home would rightfully think, right, in Iraq or Syria, fighting there. The problem, what Eric Holder was trying to get to, and he's at least correct in this threat assessment, is that people that are on U.S. passports or Canadian passports or European passports who go there, who are radicalized and then hardened in the jihad, have a tendency to return home. If we look at the Afghan model, that's the threat to us, that people can sneak under the radar to get back into here, and then all of a sudden we've got terrorists in our midst, which, by the way, also raises issues about the border.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially now when you have you know, reports of people finding books or how to speak Urdu, which is the Pakistani-Afghan language, on the border. You know, the border is wide open and susceptible to that, but they don't necessarily have to sneak over the border. Your point is that they carry American passports or Canadian passports, so they can just come freely, unsuspecting, and then come here and wreak havoc. You know, I find this whole thing very fascinating. I think the advent of the internet and technology and this kind of social media jihad that's going on has really allowed for the terrorists to make it seem as though it's all about propaganda. All it takes is one or two. I don't know how many are actually being recruited in this with this method and going over there. I think all it takes is one or two, and then they're able to put it out in mass media places because of the internet. And I don't know how we necessarily stop that. I mean, Al-Qaeda had their Insight magazine that's online.
Inspire, yeah.
Inspire, that's right. Inspire
because
magazine.
It's an outlier. We're not looking at a large population to pull some kind of evidence from, Charles, but I think your question is interesting. What is the appeal here? And I would have to guess you were hovering around it. It's the ultimate counterculture right now, and it's mixed up in this odd cocktail of this is how I can be rebellious, and also because it's somehow violent and warlike, it can also give me purpose. And so as Tim talked about kids searching, all of a sudden they have purpose and rebellion. That I've got to assume that's the magnet, that's the draw.
But there is something to what you pointed to. There is a facilitator in the way that they're using social media to reach those kids. Because while there are a lot of kids that are searching for things and may be drawn to kind of the darker side of things at some point in their life, but they don't have a vehicle to get a hold of it. And now they do because of social media. And I do think it's interesting that everyone says ISIS is one of the best utilizing social media in a way that we haven't seen other terrorist organizations use. And I am curious as to whether or not, when you talked about stopping, and this is something that you'll know, Buck, whether or not the fact that they do use social media so well, does that provide an opportunity for people in the CIA and the NSA to get ahead of it and stop them because of the way they're using it? Is there an opportunity to exploit it?
Tim, let me kick that to you before we got to go to a break here. Do you think that there is, you heard the question, take it.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, yeah, there's definitely an opportunity, but then we have First Amendment issues because, you know, already the NSA has caused quite a stir with Edward Snowden's revelations on reading emails and everything else. And do we really want the CIA and the FBI scouring everyone's Facebook accounts every day to look for any connections or Twitter accounts?
No.
The thing is that these kids, 18 to 20, 22-year-olds, social media is a vast part of their life. So, you know, they're tweeting, they're doing all the social interaction via electronics, and so they can communicate with anybody on the planet very easily, and those messages can be distributed very widely.
All right. Tim, thank you very much. Good seeing you. We appreciate your expertise.
Thank you, Buck.
Misfit Stories up next.